We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. I find that so beautiful, right? We learn from reflecting on experience. How often do we have the time to be able to truly reflect, to be able to grow from that? Meaning, as a leader, yes, you do bring all of yourself, but you have to be careful in terms of how much of yourself you bring. Meaning, it can't be raw, unprocessed emotions, right? Now, the opposite of investing in the vision is what I call vision debt. This is very much like technical debt, except it's on the vision side, where it's great for short-term survival, but it's not good for the long-term vision.
Whether you want more innovation more easily, you are feeling burnt out or overwhelmed, or you simply know that something isn't quite the way you know it can be, you are not alone. I hear the same from leaders every day. On Uncommon Leadership, we explore aligning personal fulfillment with business success, creating authentic teams, and cultivating the resilience, adaptability, and ease necessary to move beyond simply surviving today's challenges into thriving. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams, and today we'll uncover fresh insights into what it means to lead in the world today. Joining me is Radhika Dutt. Radhika is the author of Radical Product Thinking, the New Mindset for Innovating Smarter, which has been translated into Chinese and Japanese. She is a consultant, speaker, and entrepreneur who has participated in 5 acquisitions, 2 of which were companies that she founded. She's an electrical engineer from MIT and speaks 9 languages. Radhika is now working on her second book. It's about why goals and targets backfire and what actually works. Welcome, Radhika.
Thanks for having me here, Michael. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. When did you first recognize that integrating your whole self, bringing that into everything that you do, might be a valuable approach?
Hmm. It took me a while to actually get there because, I do remember there was a leader that I observed early in my career, and a similar such leader who had the same trait, even, in my 30s. And, this trait that they both had was this ability to be super calm and poker faced, no matter just how badly the meeting around them was going. It might have been a shitstorm in there, but they kept their cool. And, just you couldn't tell what they were thinking. And they were able to create change by having this sort of um, even keel about them all the time. And I would often observe these 2 leaders at different points in my career and always feel like I wish I could be that even keel all the time, that I didn't, show all of this passion and intensity, that I wasn't wearing my emotions on my sleeve. And it doesn't mean that I'm emotional in meetings, right? I am extremely deliberate in what I say and my message, etc. But definitely, it's a lot more animated if, it's a shitstorm of a meeting. Um, but what I found much later, like in my 40s, right, was that I am able to create change too, really effectively, but with my own trait. And that trait is the passion and the energy that I bring into both the organization, but also that people trust me, that they know that I don't hide anything. Like I wear my emotions on my sleeve. They can tell exactly what I'm thinking. There are no hidden incentives, there's no hidden agenda. And that creates a sense of trust where people end up opening up to me and we work closely. They can see that everything that I'm doing, it's fueled by a passion of, wanting to make things better for all of us together. And that helps me make change. So what I've realized is, I guess, in this career and watching different people, is you sort of have to just learn to embrace your own traits, and how that helps you create the change that you want to. That you have to do it using your own product that you construct. It's not with someone else is able to construct a different product out of themselves, right? And your product, which is your mechanism for creating change, has to be uniquely yours. That can only happen as you embrace all of yourself.
Yes, I love this example because that calm, even keel, nothing ever rocks their boat leader is what many of us grew up thinking this is what leadership means. This is what I have to be. This is the perfect leader. And you have just shown that that is absolutely not the case. And that perfectly calm, even keel, some people take as they're not showing me anything of who they am. It's just a facade. There has to be more going on behind there. And therefore, I can't trust them because they aren't showing me what's actually going on. I don't have any idea what they're actually thinking. And the answer, as you said, is all of us are different. Some of us are just naturally very calm. Others are naturally very energetic. Some of us naturally flow between those two extremes all the time or on some regular cadence. And all of these might be us putting on a front or might be us being completely authentic. And it's only the more that we understand what our natural balance is and where we most accurately flow that we're going to do our best work, which lets other people flock to us who want to work in that way and do their best work, whether it's in that way or something completely different.
It's really interesting you say that because, I agree with what you're saying. And I think there's also a limit, right, to this, to how far we can go with that. Meaning, as a leader, yes, you do bring all of yourself, but you have to be careful in terms of how much of yourself you bring. Meaning, it can't be raw, unprocessed emotions, right? So I'll tell you a real life example. There's a leader I've observed, and there are times when I can see exactly how they're feeling. And they might be feeling really negatively. It might be that, they're really tired or whatever. And there are other times that they're feeling very positive and, are very upbeat. And some of it has to do with their own moods and sort of what is going on around them, what happened at home, etc. Right? And like I think that is really hard. You really cannot bring that sort of emotional dysregulation to your work. Like if you ever do that, that it has to be truly a rare occasion and not something that happens on a regular basis. Um, the emotional dysregulation of banging on the table or yelling at a team or those sorts of actions. But even either feeling super unhappy, just unrelated to what the team is accomplishing, etc. All of that can be super demotivating for teams. So I think the bringing oneself complete or bringing one's whole self to uh, the office, I think, or to work, the limits to that, I'll say, is bringing one's processed self to the office. What is not processed, what is raw, you have to process that before bringing it.
Yes. And there's work is not therapy. The level of detail of what's going on doesn't have to be full on. For some people, bringing lots of detail to the conversation about what's going on is their natural way. And that can work fine when this is what they do all the time. The team understands this is what's going on. It doesn't have to be that. Simply saying, I've got a lot going on today. I'm struggling to stay present. I'm going to do my best to help with the meeting. And if I leave, it's because I just can't deal right now. It's not about anything any of you are doing. That could be enough. Doesn't even have to be that much. It can just be, got a lot going on today. let's get on with the meeting. I'll do what I can. And at the same time, what I've learned from some people is that it's not even how regulated we are, it's how consistent we are in the amount of regulation we bring or the actions that we do. If I'm always banging on the table, then everyone else knows that Michael always bangs on the table. It's just what he does. And as long as I'm always banging on the table for all the same points in time or reasons, then that's fine, even if it may be completely dysregulated. Because people know what to expect, and so they can trust that this is what's going to happen. Michael's going to come into a meeting and he'll bang on the table. It may not be the best way for me to lead, but people know this is what I do. And these are all made up examples because I don't often bang on the table.
See, I'm going to disagree with you there, actually. Because I feel like, yes, what you talk about, predictability, yes, having predictability is really important. But what I'll counter with is if one is in a position of leadership, then it's a position of responsibility and power. Like with great power comes great responsibility. Like I had a leader say to me just recently, well, but my entire team knows I'm always like this and I say such things. And I'm like, but just because they know it doesn't mean it's okay, right? Even this leader's team has said to me, yeah, we have to manage this particular leader. It's a different one from the previous one I was talking about. But like, yeah, having this predictability doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. I think we do have to recognize that when you bang on the table, that if you have power, there is responsibility that comes with it. It has consequences. That if you're the type who bangs on the table, people are going to be afraid to tell you things that, you'll be the last to know. When, instead, if you had a calmer approach, you're going to get to know the things that you really need to, so that you can take the turn by feeling the ground better.
Yes. Everything can be too extreme. And even those leaders who are always perfectly calm and balanced, there's certain times where that is not the right approach to help a team move through something or to help the team understand what's going on. Showing some people will take that to mean they're not engaged. They just don't care. They don't really care about me because they never show any emotion. Or I can't show emotion around them, even though I'm naturally going to do that, like you were saying you do. So we always, as leaders, have room to grow and to be more agile with our approach and to do a better job of bringing to the room what it most needs right then. And we're always doing great where we are. So there's great, and there's always more great. It's an infinite progression. What I find matters more than any of this is the leader inviting conversation with the team into how they're doing, how the leader is doing, what feedback they might have to the leader, and even more than feedback, inviting them into a conversation so the leader can understand the impact that they're having on the team and everyone else that's involved. Because it's managing that impact and having that impact be what we want it to be that matters more than all of the other things. Yes, there are 100 different ways to get a certain impact, and some of those are going to be more healthy than others. If we can't have a conversation about what that impact is, then kind of nothing else matters because we're only guessing blindly and we don't even know if we're having the outcomes that we're meaning to create.
This gets into the topic of the next book that I'm working on, which is about defining the narrative of the impact and how do we have those insightful conversations. One thing that um, what's so ingrained in corporate psyche is this idea of goal setting, to be able to define the narrative of the impact that we want to create, right? We think of goals and setting goals and targets, etc., as a way to communicate to the team that this is the impact that we want to have. And then, people are expected to hit those goals as a way of communicating, hey, we've achieved that impact, right? Um, but I think what really goes wrong in this whole picture is, well, two things. One, we assume that goals and targets and achieving numbers is a good enough description of the narrative of the impact, right? And that's the first thing I'll question, which is, why do you need goals and targets as the narrative of the impact? And the answer to this usually is that we have really just crappy vision statements. We have vision statements like, let's see, think different, or a vision statement like empowering people to create progress by expressing themselves. That's a vision statement of an actual company. Um, then there is Boeing's vision that goes something like to be the enduring global industrial champion in aerospace. Like, I call these crappy visions, right? Because what does it even mean to be the enduring leader in aerospace? Do you measure that in market share, in revenues? Is that about technological superiority? Like, how exactly are you measuring it, right? And in the lack of clarity of how you measure it, or not even how you measure it, how you define it, you then rely on numbers, and we want to look at our market share, or and then invest in share buybacks because that's going to boost some other numbers. Like, it's this focus on metrics without solid clarity on what is the vision, what is the problem statement, what are we setting out to solve in the world, right? And so first thing I'll say is, instead of focusing on just numbers, let's first focus on a clear vision statement. And I'll talk about in a moment, like, what a clear vision statement means and how leaders can write actual vision statements as opposed to, these fluffy things like being the leader or revolutionizing blah, blah, or democratizing blah, blah. The second thing is, when you set goals and targets, what happens is you're not inviting conversation. You're not inviting the good and the bad. What you're really inviting is for people to tell you, ta-da, I've hit my goal. They'll pick out the good numbers to show you, ta-da, it all is great. And it's not malicious. It's not about gaming numbers. Even subconsciously, they themselves are looking for the positives to please you, to show you, look, things are going well. What you really want is the insightful conversations where people are looking at the bad numbers, quote unquote, and thinking about, is this an opportunity? Is this a problem? Why are we seeing this? What might this be telling us? Those insightful conversations are what unlock the next opportunity.
Yes, one sign of a good goal vision statement of direction for me has become, how do we know that we're heading in that direction? How what can we do to become more that? How do we become more democratizing the something of something? There's a gazillion ways to do that. And I don't know how to even have how to know, am I doing more of that or less of that based on the shift that I'm making? Many of the metrics that I see companies measuring theoretically have some relation to the goal that they believe they have, and no one knows how to make that metric go up or down. They don't even know their understanding of what that metric even means. It's just sort of up is good, bad, down is bad, or vice versa in some cases. Customer churn is down, we must be doing something right. Okay, but are the customers you have the ones you want? Are they coming to you for the problem you think you're solving? Are they there because they can't get out, even though they would desperately like to? Are they bringing more people in? There's all sorts of questions of that. Just knowing customer churn is lower than it ever has been doesn't mean we're in the right direction at all. And it might mean exactly that. This, I think, is one of the big puzzles of business and life. How do we know that we are aligned with who we are and the direction we want to be going? And then aggregating that out into the bigger business and social structures that we take part in. How do I know that this is the right company for me at this point in my career or in my life? How do I know that it's going to help me further my goals in life? And how do I know that I'm the best person to help them further their goals? It's if we had perfect clarity on all of these things, life would be so much simpler for everyone and so much more full of joy.
Well, I think we can start to strive. Sorry. I think we can start to work towards that clarity, right? And so this is where I talk about a vision statement that talks about the problem statement. Um, so I'm going to talk about this vision that we can write both for our work and perhaps a product that we're working on, but it's something I've even used for my personal life. And so I'll share an example of that, both on the work side and personal life. I think the clarity starts with writing a vision statement, right? And once we have this clarity of vision, then we can think about how do we move in that direction. And we can talk more about that in a moment. But one thing that I just want to unpack out of everything that you were saying is I think we often conflate vision with goals. Vision is where we want to go directionally. Vision doesn't have to have numbers. Vision is about the problem statement. And then we can evaluate, are we making progress? But that's a separate question. Let's not include that in the vision. So here's an example of a vision statement, and it's written in the Radical Product Thinking format. So Radical Product Thinking is that first book that I'd written. And so here's a radical vision statement for a startup that I'd founded in 2011 and sold in 2014. Today, when amateur wine drinkers want to find wines that they like and learn about wine, they have to find attractive looking wine labels or find wines that are on sale. This is unacceptable because it leads to so many disappointments, and it's hard to learn about wine in this way. We envision a world where finding movies you like is a similar model that we can use to finding wines you like. So, meaning we envision a world where we can create something that's like a Netflix for wine. We are bringing this about through a recommendations algorithm that brings that matches wines to your personal taste and then brings these wines to your table. Now, every time I say this vision statement, some of the words might change here and there. It's not about memorizing a vision, right? This is a fill in the blank statement, as you heard. But this fill in the blank statement helps you answer the profoundly difficult questions to answer, meaning whose problem are you solving? What is their problem? Why must it be solved? Because frankly, maybe it doesn't need to be solved. And then you can answer what is the world you envision and how you're going to bring it about, right? So this is what I mean by clarity of vision. This finally describes what is the impact you really want to have. Now you can think about how will you measure it, and that's a separate question. And my point about, having such a fill in the blank statement, I took the time to write such a vision statement even for my personal life. And that vision has evolved over time. So here's the vision I wrote when my kids were younger. And now, by the way, that vision looks different. But this is the other point, that this sort of a vision statement, when you write it in a fill in the blanks format, the clarity that you have today, because the market changes, circumstances change, it changes over time. So you revisit this every ever so often, and then you say, is this still valid? You might have to revisit it every month if you're an early stage startup, or it might be, every 6 months if you're a more mature product. So here's a personal vision statement when my kids were younger. So today, when my husband and my two kids, when they need someone to really see them, hear them, understand them, they have to turn to me or look within themselves. And that latter part isn't always easy. This is unacceptable because unless they have someone as a parent who is an emotional anchor and a partner who's able to be present, it's really hard to thrive in life. And for my kids, this would mean years and years of therapy if I cannot be a present parent, so that they can eventually have secure attachment styles. I envision a world where I have Gandhi like patience and I'm able to be that emotional anchor in my family. The way I'm bringing that about is taking on work that allows me to have the emotional and mental bandwidth so that I can have Gandhi like patience at home. This was my vision statement when my kids were younger, and now that vision statement has evolved a lot, right? And so writing such a vision, when I describe it to you, it sounds like, oh, this was easy. And in fact, I once described a vision statement of one organization as leaders were debating their vision statement to create alignment. And they go like, oh, but I'm sure creating that vision statement for that company was easy because their product is so obvious. It's not that it was obvious. It was more that once you have gone through the process, the answer you come up with sounds obvious, but it took work to get there. And so this is a hard process to answer these profound questions, but I guarantee it's worth taking the time because it provides so much clarity.
Yes, this is that's a great way to describe all the work I do with everyone I work with, is helping them get to a similar place so that they can know for everything that they do, is this bringing them farther along their path or holding them back? Is this bringing them more into alignment of where they want to go or less? That template you described for a vision statement, I love, is it helps everyone in the company and everyone considering working with or for the company to filter themselves in or out. There, it's very clear. Do I believe this is a problem? No. Well, either I don't want to work there then, or I want to go there because I think they're wrong and I want to help them see the error other ways. Do I believe that's unacceptable? Yes, no, same decision points. Is the path that they're taking make sense to me? Does that seem like a reasonable way to go about making that unacceptability go away? Great, I'm 100% in.
Exactly. It creates so much clarity and alignment within the team. And then this is where, you were saying, how do you know if you're making progress towards this vision or not? One of the things that I talk about in radical product thinking is that, we need to constantly evaluate our priorities and what we're working on, right? What we're planning on working on. And we evaluate it against the vision to see, are we making progress? And what I find is, as leaders, intuitively, what we do is we're balancing long term against short term. Right? We're thinking about the long-term vision, we're thinking about what keeps the lights on today, and then we're constantly balancing these. And what might be obvious decisions for us aren't always that obvious to our teams. And so what I find really helpful is once you have this level of clarity on your vision, it's really helpful to make these trade-offs obvious to your team. And the way I do that is I draw an X and a Y axis. So now that you have a clear vision, that vision is your y-axis. Is this good for the vision or not good for the vision? So that's your y-axis, right? And your x-axis becomes, is this good for survival or not? Right? And survival, if you're a small company, might be financial survival. Is this going to bring in revenues or funding, etc., right? Or not? If you're a big company, this might be, will your stakeholders support you or not? That might be survival for you, your stakeholder support. And so once you have these two axes, then you can start to evaluate decisions. So things that are good for the vision and good for survival, those are the easy decisions. But if you're always sticking with easy decisions, then we're still being just myopic. Sometimes you have to do what I call invest in the vision. That's the quadrant where it's good for the long-term vision, but it's not good for short-term survival. So examples of this might be, maybe you have to invest in training, right? That's not helpful for short-term survival, but it's perhaps helpful for the long-term vision. Maybe you have to refactor code for the next 3 months. And, maybe that's not helping you create new features, but hey, it's going to help you build faster over time, so that's good for the vision. Now, the opposite of investing in the vision is what I call vision debt. This is very much like technical debt, except it's on the vision side, where it's great for short-term survival, but it's not good for the long-term vision. So an example for this is your salesperson says to you, we can win this mega deal if you just add these custom features. So it's bringing in money, so it's helpful for survival, but it may not be good for the vision, right? So that's vision debt. And then there's, of course, the danger quadrant, which is bad for both vision and survival, but nobody's clamoring for those things, right? It's just sometimes things might seem like vision debt, that it's helping you win, let's say, that mega deal, but that thing might just migrate into the danger quadrant because the customer decides not to buy in the end and you've built this custom stuff. So that's danger quadrant. So my point with this vision versus survival is once you have these 4 quadrants in your head, you can then start to help your team see how you're prioritizing vision against survival as you're making decisions. When you say to your team, guys, look, we have to take on this vision debt because we have to hit these quarter numbers. If we don't, we are not going to survive. You're acknowledging that you're having to take on vision debt, that you're doing it to survive another day. But just even acknowledging that is helpful for your team because they feel like, okay, at least you're not losing faith in the vision. I understand why we're having to do it. You're communicating what is the impact you want to have and why you're deviating from it at the moment.
This is a great way to make all these decisions that we're making all the time that so often are invisible to everyone else and oftentimes to ourselves, visible. If we take the time to map this out, to first build that clear vision, and then that we can then use to build these quadrant diagrams for our decisions, then everyone is at least there in a concrete form for everyone to see, which makes it more likely that errors in logic or judgment can be picked up by someone. We have conversations about which quadrant is this really in? That's where you say it is, but I think it's actually in this other one because of this, and this. And even if everyone agrees that this is the right thing to do, then we have this artifact that helps us remember why we made that decision and where we thought it was going to take us, which will then help us reflect when we come back a day, a week, a month, a year later in retrospect on where has that decision taken us, what has happened because of that in relation to where we thought it was, and we can map those differentials and understand it didn't take us where we thought it would. Maybe it took us farther. This is great. Maybe it didn't take us as far, or it degraded in one of the axes for some reason. We can have those conversations then and evaluate, which will then help us make better decisions next time. Whereas when this is all just invisible
Mm.
to ourselves, to everyone else, to some set of people, even if that's just one person on the team, then we can't have these conversations because it's not there enough form that we can reason about and discuss and point out and argue over. It stays all more theoretical in the clouds conversations or concepts.
Yeah, I love what you said. So much to unpack in there. Like, I think when we have an intuition for what is the right trade-off between vision versus survival, right? Um, it's not always obvious to our team. And what we want to do is we want to build that intuition in our team so that we don't have to be in every single meeting, right? Where we have conveyed this intuition to people in our organization so that even when, you're on vacation, you can feel confident that when the team is having meetings without you, that they're making the same sort of decisions that you would have made if you were in that room, right? And so um, this is why talking about these trade-offs so explicitly on an X and Y axis is really helpful so that you can scale your leadership. So that was one thing. The second thing that you were talking about, right, is now that you have this way of thinking about decisions, when you want to look back, you were talking about, what went well or not. One format that I'm talking about in this next book that I'm working on is, the following three questions to have those insightful conversations. Because everything that we work on in the corporate world or in our lives, we can think of those as puzzles. Puzzles that we've set, and then puzzles that we're solving through various decisions. And so, as you're solving a puzzle, we ask three questions. So, the first question is, how well did it work? So, whatever you attempted, being able to invite the good and the bad. So, rather than just setting a goal or a target that asks the question, have you or haven't you achieved this number, right? I'm inviting both the good and the bad when I ask, how well did it work? The second question is, what did we learn? This is where I say to teams, yes, I do want you to share numbers, but I don't just want the numbers. Don't just tell me, here's the sales pipeline, the number of leads generated, blah, blah. Or, if it's about product, don't just tell me user engagement rates, returning user rates, blah, blah, blah. It's not just that. I want to know, what have you learned? What is actually happening? And then comes the third question. What will you do next? So, meaning if I gave you a magic wand based on how well it worked and what you've learned, what would you ask for? Right? And these three questions, I find them to be so powerful. And so, this is the sort of insightful conversation that we need to have. And I'll give an example, right? So, we might be looking at an engineering or product problem. Let's say the problem was we were observing that only tech savvy people were using our platform. And we wanted to make the product a lot simpler so that tech averse people will use it too. Now you try something. Maybe you tried automation. This is all actual, a real example that I've been working through with a company. This was what happened. So we thought maybe we can add automation, right? And that will make things so much simpler for the tech averse users. They're going to love it. So we tried that. So now let's ask these three questions. How well did it work? It turned out that people liked the workflow we were showing, but they hated the automation. Second question, what did we learn from this? If we only looked at user engagement rates, the returning customer rates, etc., it would have told us a partial story. But we had to understand it better and figure out the narrative in our heads, what's happening. And here's what we figured out after observation, etc. We found that they liked the workflow, but the automation, they did not trust it. In tech-averse people, it felt like magic. And tech-averse people hated magic. They did not trust technology enough to trust the magic. So this is why it wasn't working. So the third question, what will we try next? Based on this, we realized, okay, we are going to build a workflow, but instead of creating automation that does all of these steps for you, we will guide you through every single step and let you very systematically decide so that you feel in control, so that for tech-averse people, they know exactly and can predict exactly what's happening next. And so this is how we can set a vision, plan our actions by balancing vision against survival, and then we can evaluate all of our decisions by asking three questions. How well did it work? What have we learned? What will we try next?
This is a nice additional level of detail to what I call the simplest possible process, which is, what do you want to do? Well, let's do that. What did we learn? What does that suggest to do next? And that what did we learn phase is where it explodes into your three questions to give additional guidance when the answer isn't clear or when there's dissension over what we learned. Then we can drop down to this additional level of detail of the questions that you bring and see if we can get clarity there. And if there's still dissension about what's going on, what to do next, then there's always another level of detail that we can drop into in one of those three questions and keep going until we get down to what the actual point that we're disagreeing on is, make that visible, then we can have that conversation and bubble back up and see where else we might have disagreements on. And eventually we can get all of that worked out and get up to a consensus on, okay, this is what we'll do next.
I love that. And I think, to add to what you said, right? I think having this level of clarity so that you can get into more detail is helpful, but the starting point can be one where we're asking questions. What you said, right? You were saying, well, what do we want to do? And then trying it. This is one thing that I find happens often in the corporate world. We start with, what do we want to do? And the solution space. There is this temptation to start with the solution space. And why is that? Why is that? Because questions and the unknown makes us deeply uncomfortable. So even if you look at lean startup, right? Lean startup is often summarized as build, test, learn, scale, because we want to start with a building. Let's build something, then we'll test it, figure out what we learned, and scale. But if you look at what the book actually talks about, it does talk about identifying the problem first and looking at the problem space. But whether you look at lean startup, you talk to UX researchers, we all know in theory that we should stick with the problem space before we jump into the solution. But in practice, in the corporate world, it's really hard to do. And this is one of the challenges when you have goals and targets. And I'll give you an example of this particular company that I've been working with. They had a goal or a target that we have to increase user engagement by X%. And when I first started working with the team, having that sort of a goal and target was pushing us into the solution space right away, because we were looking at the same observation that only tech-averse people, that tech-averse people are not using our platform. And the solution we wanted to jump to was, oh, we can see that the data is pointing us to one particular feature that is really painful. Everyone is complaining about that. Let's just fix that, right? So this is where I want us to step back from jumping into the solution. Let's define the puzzle. When you define the puzzle, you start with this observation about, okay, it's only the tech-averse people who are using it, but let's ask some open questions. The open questions might be, why are only tech-averse people using this? What is their mental model? How do those tech-averse people work today in that industry? What are they doing? What is their workflow? And by the way, when we were asking these open questions, I got a lot of pushback from sales. They were like, you guys should already know the answers to these questions. Don't ask don't ask our customers stupid questions, was what they would often say. But here's the thing. asking questions feels deeply uncomfortable because we feel like we have to know, but it was only by observing and figuring out how do those tech-averse people think that we were then able to say, ah, now I know what to try. It was by observing and staying in that discomfort of the problem space that we were then able to, it's like looking at a Rubik's Cube, observing how the pieces move, and then saying, okay, now I'm going to try my first attempt. And that's where you can set the puzzle first. Then in puzzle solving, you ask the three questions. How well did it work? What have I tried? How well did it work? What have I learned? What will I try next?
Thank you for reminding me to start with questions. I like to think I always do. And I always discover that I'm not as far into the questions as I think I am.
It's so tempting to want to be in the solution space, right? Like I think this is what we all do. Like I was also starting at that company wanting to jump into, oh yeah, great, let's fix this feature. That's where we started. And it's when we started testing that first attempt that we were like, wait, this isn't going to solve anything. Like customers are still not like excited about what we've solved for, what we thought was the problem. That's when we realized, okay, we need to step back and observe and understand the problem better.
I find I often believe I'm talking about problem, and I discover I'm actually talking implementation. And I guess we've just seen this here in a in the last 5 minutes. It's and one thing I'm hearing from you is it's not just me, it's everyone, which is comforting and also super scary because that means everyone is falling into the same trap. I thank you, Radhika, for it.
And it's so interesting, right? No, thank you for pointing that out because you also make me realize that, this is in fact a trap that we all fall into, particularly because action and doing is what is rewarded in the corporate world. I remember I was once talking to a company and I was talking about strategy and, what we need to first think through before we jump into implementation. And they were like, we don't have time for strategy. and and that was strategy, and at least when it comes to strategy, at least in the corporate world, most people will agree, yes, strategy is important. But then once you say we need to stay in the problem space, that becomes even more uncomfortable. It's like, let's just try things. And this is what we often hear from Silicon Valley, right? We hear, well, just try something, throw something in the market, see what works, keep iterating. Just throw an MVP out there and iterate. And what I find is, right, when you take that approach, it leads to a local maximum where maybe you've solved the small piece that data is telling you about, but you haven't figured out the real opportunity. You haven't addressed the unknown unknowns. What do I mean by this? Like in this particular case for this company I was talking about, right? If we had just looked at what our data is telling us, it would have told us how to improve the current product for current customers. By looking at these other users who were not even using our product, observing them and understanding their mental models, we were able to expand our product to those people on whom we had no data. And that's the kind of shift that we're able to make, the real leap that is the global maximum as opposed to the local maximum.
We don't have data on the data we haven't thought to gather, which is hard to remember when we can so easily gather so much data at such a volume so much of the time. And even when yes, I have sat in rooms where teams of 20 people have argued for hours over what the 50, 100, 500 data points that they had across all these different parts of their product or their just one feature in some cases mean. And they have this for an immense scale of people across all sorts of demographics and all the other spectrums that they thought they cared about. And no one could agree on what it means. That's, and I, and now I wonder how much of that could have been short circuited if A, they had had a vision statement written in the way that you suggest, and two, if instead of arguing over what all the data meant, they were asking your three questions and using the data to help answer them.
Mm, I love what you're describing. That's really powerful, right? Um, and maybe I'll add one more thing to it, which is if they could look at that data and then define the puzzle, that, it works both ways. One is you might have data and you might need to take some time to look at that data and define what do you want to solve for? Because you have all this data. It might tell you, 15 things are wrong, but what are you solving for? And the puzzle helps you define that. And the way you set the puzzle is through the three O's. The first O is the observation. So, what is the observation? And even in looking at the data and making an observation, you're taking some time to gather your thoughts and condense what you want to look at out of that data. And what is the observation? What is the narrative? That helps you set what are you solving for. Then the open questions. That's the second O. What are the open questions? What do we not understand out of this observation? Like, what would help us dig into this? And the example that I gave, right? Well, the observation was only tech averse users are using this, and the open questions are, well, I don't understand why are sorry, the other way. The observation was tech averse people are the ones who are not using it, and the open questions are, why aren't they using it? How do they think? How is that different from tech savvy users and how tech savvy users think? What is the workflow of these tech averse people in this industry? How are they thinking about it? How do they do their work? You ask all of these open questions and then you summarize the puzzle in the objective. That's the third O, the objective, where you say, how do we solve this puzzle and get back to our growth trajectory? Perhaps that's what you're trying to get to. So, looking at data and being able to define the puzzle that we want to solve creates this alignment to then say, okay, what are we going to go observe? What's the problem we're going to delve into a little bit? And then you might decide, okay, now I know what's the first attempt I'm going to make at solving it.
Those three O's would have made such a difference to me a long time ago. I never knew where I was going. I just knew that what I had just done was closer, was farther away, and I never understood how to characterize it. If I had simply just written down and so had this clarity, visibility of what am I doing? Trying to figure out what I'm doing. How am I getting there? I have no idea. So I'm doing a random thing to see what happens. Then at least I would have made clear to me that I didn't know what I was doing, that was okay, that I was doing all these random things to learn. And as I gained clarity, then I would have the concrete action of physically adjusting the vision, the O's, the questions to reflect where I did have clarity and where now I had more open questions, which would have given me a lot more structure for defining those next steps.
I love that you brought it to the personal, right? And being able to think about this puzzle setting at a personal level. And I find that super interesting because, yeah, I agree with you that, for me too, I think, when we're very driven, we tend to want to set goals for ourselves, and especially, there's the end of 2025, we're moving into 2026. People are probably thinking about resolutions, goals, etc., that they have for themselves. And I find that when we're setting goals for ourselves, we sort of take away the curiosity and the openness in terms of asking questions, that wonder, right? Um, and if we can just set it as a puzzle, and it can be a puzzle about, well, I want to discover what is fulfilling. That might be, what the objective is. You might have certain observations that, for example, maybe you're feeling burnt out from your current work, and you might have open questions. What is it that is causing the most amount of burnout? Is it this particular work? Is it your work in general? Is it um, the environment? Is it the back to office sort of work structure? There may be a bunch of open questions that you might have to reflect on and observe, right? And then you might have to try experiments and ask the three questions of, how well is it working? What have I learned? What will I try next? But I love what you've described. I think it's an alternate way for us to even think about goal setting for ourselves rather than jumping into what are my goals and saying, okay, I want to run a marathon this year or whatever that goal is, right? Um, Thinking more deeply about what is the puzzle that I want to solve for myself, which is actually a much harder thing to sit down and reflect on. And I guess this is where there's a quote that I came across this year, and I love this quote. I find it so powerful. It says, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. I find that so beautiful, right? We learn from reflecting on experience. How often do we have the time to be able to truly reflect, to be able to grow from that?
I also love that quote. And one thing I appreciate about it is it doesn't say we learn from reflecting on our experience. So in this hour today, I have learned from reflecting on your experience. And that means all the things that you have done to come up with this wisdom and knowledge, I don't have to go do. I may still want to go do some of that, but I don't have to because I can reflect on your experience and learn from that. And that means everyone else in the universe who's doing all these other different things in completely different ways than I would ever do, I can learn from all of those simply by reflecting on their experiences.
I love what you said. In the book, Right Kind of Wrong, Amy Edmondson says, research shows that we actually learn better from other people's failures than our own.
I believe that.
So there we go. Research proves it, people.
So we are an hour into our conversation, Radhika, and only on my first question, except as I look through the questions, we've really answered all of the others as well. How you build cultures where people feel safe and empowered to bring their unique talents to everything that they do, the business value of creating these cultures, how you help people find their way through all the change and uncertainty and overwhelm that life is these days. That's everything that we've been talking about all the way through. So, for people who would like to learn, reflect on your experiences more, engage you to help them find the puzzles that they're struggling to understand in their company or life, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So I'm very reachable on LinkedIn. You can just connect with me or message me on LinkedIn, and I'll share a link to my profile for show notes. And also, people can download the free Radical Product Thinking Toolkit as well as the OHL's Toolkit. I'll also share a link to that in the show notes. The puzzle setting and puzzle solving toolkit is what I call the OHLs or OLA toolkit. I'm still figuring out the name, but the idea is puzzle setting and puzzle solving, and I'll share the link. Um, and lastly, People are very welcome to reach out to me with their own experiences, whether it's at work or in personal life. Because as I write about this book, as I write this book about puzzle setting and puzzle solving and how you can apply this instead of just focusing on goals and targets, I would welcome your experiences, and they might just make it into the book as a case study.
That sounds great. And we will have all those links in our show notes. What would you like to leave our audience with today?
Well, I think this whole year, since we're in December, maybe I'll share a quick tidbit of my own learning. Um, it's been that reflection has been such a source of growth for me. To be able to reflect on, you know, just all of what has worked and hasn't worked for me, being able to embrace those failures because I haven't looked at it as with this question of have I or haven't I achieved, but rather with this openness of how well has it worked? What have I learned? What will I try next? And it's been a huge shift for me, like being able to embrace oneself, just for all of, you don't have to necessarily think about them as mistakes and failures. It's more like, there are things that I've tried based on what I knew at the time, learning from those, and then now I know what I'm going to try next. Like that whole piece of growth has been so wonderful. And what I'll share for our listeners is I think you're going to find that so much more relaxing. My own experience was, I was giving a workshop, and typically I'm very nervous. I don't show this nervousness, but I always have this adrenaline inside me. I want the workshop to go perfectly well. And this was the first time I was running this particular type of a workshop and this topic of a workshop. And it was 9 o'clock and the workshop was supposed to start. The projector was not working. And, I would have been in just a slight state of panic. Even if I didn't show it, it would have been an internal thing I'm dealing with. But you know what? I felt so relaxed. It was because, so it goes. But so much of this has come from just embracing this thought that, we're just going to think later about how well did it go? What have I learned? What will I try next? Maybe there's something to be learned, maybe not, and it's okay.
I find there's always something to be learned, even if it's, I don't know what I learned yet.
Exactly. There's a quote from a movie, Burn After Reading, where one character says to the other, "What have we learned from this?" And the other character goes, we learned to not do that again, but fuck if I know what we did."
That is a succinct summary of many long business meetings I've sat through. Thank you, Radhika, for being with us today.
Thank you, Michael. This was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, audience, for joining Radhika and me today. We would love to know, what are you looking at differently after this conversation? And what have you learned from reflecting on our experiences over the last hour? Thanks, and have a great day.